Last time on Lords of Death.
But see, what was funny about it, Homer died. And then later, we found Leela with a screwdriver drove in her head.
Just a failed robbery. But when Homer refused to give him any money, that Homer got stabbed and she got stabbed and he took off.
You know, it's just a random thing that you saw my blog entry in. I'm so sorry not to have more for you, but I'm just not the person who does.
She wasn't afraid of anything. Now, anyone with common sense, if your husband had been murdered there is no way you would ever go back and live in that farmhouse alone, at night especially, out secluded like it is. Do you think? People would tell me they'd go by and they'd see them there, to strangers that the neighbors knew most anybody around, but it wasn't anybody they knew. But she wasn't afraid of anything. But she burned and burned. They told me that for weeks she had a pit up in back, and she would burn and burn and burn stuff.
From Dayton, Ohio, I'm Thrasher Banks. This is Lords of Death. After Homer's murder, fear gripped the area around Byesville. There were reports of two males in a blue Chevy Nova driving around the area of the Potts residence. Leela was worried enough that she called Van Horn, and he drove her around town to try to identify the vehicle. They came up empty-handed, but the rumors of the Chevy Nova persisted. In October of 1988, something strange started happening in Guernsey County. Mutilated animals and satanic symbols appeared around the county, and residents feared that devil worshippers were operating in the area. The sheriff's department was concerned enough to send their officers to a special class dealing with Satanism in their community. That same month, a crime spree began that shocked and outraged the community as they demanded the police bring the culprits to justice.
What we had back at that same time was having cattle that was killed, and then we had some. They called themselves the White Witches. They was Wiccans, and myself and Ronnie Pollock, which was a detective, that we went to the school on our own. That we went down and spent a Saturday there, and we kind of shook our head and said, "There's a bunch of adults playing kids' games." So we went to, and then as I recall, I went to one or two other seminars on Satan worship. But it was not anything to do with the Potts murder. It was simply because we was having down around Quaker City, we was having the rumors of Satan worshiping and stuff.
The satanic panic had reached Guernsey County. It was common in the 80s for rural areas to blame Satan worship for peculiar events, and Guernsey County was no exception. It was a God-fearing area. The local newspaper frequently featured a biblical quote on their front page. A few days after Homer's murder, the front page quoted Book 2 of Timothy. Ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. But it wasn't Satan that they feared. It was their own. And by the end of October of 1988, the county would be rocked by events that would haunt them for decades to follow. On October 23rd of 1988, in Noble County, just south of Guernsey, two men broke into a small gun store under cover of darkness. They made off with a small arsenal of handguns, rifles, and shotguns. The next night, on October 24th, two men drove out to Antrim, a small township in Guernsey, not far from the Potts residence. Their target was a small service station, run by a woman that would be defenseless against their attack. One wore a ski mask, and the other a bandana over his face. They cut the telephone lines before entering the building. The owner heard noises coming from the rear and went to investigate. When she confronted the masked robbers, they struck her across the face with a pistol and she fell to the ground. They held her at gunpoint and demanded money, but she wasn't giving in easily. They forced her to undress and tied her to a chair. One of the men stood behind her and took a knife and cut off both of her braided pigtails. Then they proceeded to ransack the building and made off with an undetermined amount of money. The owner, who worked as a volunteer dispatcher for the local fire department, was able to get her equipment and radio for help. The sheriff's office investigated the robbery, but were unable to identify any suspects.
Like I mentioned, we had a woman that they robbed her and tied her up and cut her braids off.
I talked to Van Horn about this incident. Apart from Homer's murder, crimes like this weren't common in Guernsey County, especially something this savage.
Her and her husband and boy ran the filling station, and she was a dispatcher for the local fire department, or she took some of the calls and stuff. Exactly. That's how she finally got the attention, because she had the radio, so she talked on the radio. Even though she was tied up, she could get the attention on the radio that she had been robbed and was tied up. So she got help. Of course, it was a voluntary fire department. So once they heard that it happened, it didn't take very long for her to get help. But she swore up and down, "I don't have a clue who it is." Like I said, I'd known Martha for years, so I even sat down and talked to her. And I said, it'll happen to somebody else. I don't know, Arnold. I don't know who it was. Well, so without a victim that says they don't know, your hands are tied.
I wanted to know more about this incident, so I reached out to the county to see if I could pull a case file, since the statute of limitations on a robbery would have been expired at this point. I ran into a hang-up when I tried to obtain the documents.
I think we destroyed it. What kind of record is it? Because we just shredded a bunch way back. We shredded anything that wasn't a murder that happened at the scene got shredded.
Right, no point in hanging on to something once it's past the statute of limitations anyways, right?
Yeah, well, we held on to them for ages. And then we went through and pulled anything that was, you couldn't destroy. It was running out of room. Cases of, files in the back, and called a shredder truck in. It's been about 2-3 months ago.
After Homer's murder, Leela's family and neighbors became concerned about her behavior. A family member arranged for a security company to run surveillance on the property. Every night, Leela would dismiss the security and was seemingly unafraid of someone coming back for her. There were also sightings of mysterious men on her property, and the rumor that she was somehow involved in Homer's death spread around the area. She had a reputation for carrying around large sums of money, and her family became concerned. They continued to try to get the truth out of her about Homer's murder, but she would never admit to anything. The night after the armed robbery in Antrim, something occurred that shocked Guernsey County and left the locals fearing that a monster was on the loose in their community. Around 9 p.m. on October 25th of 1988, two men parked their car at the church near Leela Potts' home. They put on gloves and exited the vehicle, armed with knives, and moved towards Leela's house. Once they got on the property, one of them punctured the tires of Leela's car to prevent her from escaping, while the other cut the telephone lines to the house. They crept towards the rear of the home and busted out a small basement window to gain entry. Once inside, they moved towards the stairs. The door to the first floor was locked, and they had to bust out a panel to unlock it. Leela was waiting for them. The only weapon she had was a plastic flashlight. She struck the first attacker, and the flashlight busted and fell to the ground. The first man pounced and began stabbing her. They forced her into the bedroom and threw her on the bed. They wanted to know where the money was. Leela pointed to a purse, and they looked inside, but weren't satisfied. They knew there was more. They continued to stab Leela until she told them there was money under her, in the mattress. They cut it open and found the hidden cash. One of the men then entered the kitchen to grab a bag for the money. He opened the drawer, leaving bloody handprints, and grabbed a trash bag and a screwdriver. They pushed Leela onto the ground beside the bed and loaded the bag full of the cash. Throughout the attack, 4 different weapons were used: a hammer, a knife, a gardening tool, and a screwdriver. After Leela was fatally wounded from over 15 stab wounds, one of the men took the screwdriver and struck her in the left temple. It didn't go through, so he struck her again, and it still didn't go through. On the third attempt, the screwdriver went through her skull. He was a man with no soul, no conscience, a lord of death. Leela's body was found the next day by police. She was lying next to her bed with the screwdriver still protruding from her temple. There was a plastic cross broken into 3 pieces lying near her body that a relative said didn't belong to her. Despite the messy crime scene, the investigators had no leads, and her murder remains unsolved today. I asked Van Horn what it would take to bring the culprits to justice.
A miracle.
A miracle?
A miracle. Somebody coming forth and say, hey, he confessed to me, or they confessed to me, and I'm willing to testify. And the longer the time goes, the more people die off, and their memories, just like me, you don't remember all the details and stuff. So, but it'd take a miracle, because even the cold case, they went through it with a fine-tooth comb, and they couldn't come up with anything.
I had a suspicion that Leela's murder was more than a botched robbery. Killers this savage and vicious couldn't have stopped after Leela. I knew there were more murders, so I kept digging. I wanted to know whose crucifix was found at the scene, and how a murder this brutal could remain a mystery. But the story doesn't end there. 7 years later, in June of 1995, a woman was murdered in Dayton, and a man in custody said he had information to share with Guernsey County. The Dayton Daily News reported that Van Horn questioned a man about the murders of Homer and Leela Potts and a 17-year-old pregnant girl who was killed named Robin Stone. A few months ago, I had a conversation with a local. He said there was more to the story, and that I needed to keep digging. He told me there was a photo album stolen from Leela's house that night, and that there were $100 bills behind the photos, and several individuals lived off of the money for a while. He said the photos were graphic, and that I wouldn't believe him, even if he told me. He said there was a woman who knew everything. A woman named Margaret. She was hard to track down, but I kept searching for months. I wasn't going to stop until I reached her. I wanted to know the truth about the Potts murders.